Ah yes, the Great American Road Trip. Iconic travel routes, historic landmarks, scenic destinations, and rest stop delights. But driver beware. The US certainly has exceptional roads, but not for the reasons you probably think. No other developed country tolerates the level of carnage on their roads that Americans do. In fact, in 2024, the United States had over 39,000 road deaths, compared to just under 20,000 in the EU. In other words, the US had nearly double the absolute number of annual road deaths, despite the EU having a larger combined population, more traffic congestion, and a much more dense infrastructure. And that number of road fatalities in the United States is increasing. So what gives? Why exactly are American roads so much more dangerous than Europe's? The answer, I think, will surprise you. So let's dive into the data and take a look together. As I mentioned at the start of this video, the United States is truly exceptional when it comes to road deaths in comparison to other wealthy nations. In fact, Americans are killed on roads at several times the rate seen in comparable European nations like Germany, France, and the UK, even when breaking down the number into deaths per million inhabitants. In fact, in comparison to where I live here in Germany, the US experiences roughly 4 times as many road deaths per capita. And before you counter-argue in the comment section, yes, Europeans, including the French, the Germans, and the British, do drive less miles or kilometers on average per person. Not only because places tend to be less spread out here, but also because we have a much more robust network of public transit options. You simply don't need to drive as far or as often. For one point of reference, in 2024, German drivers drove an average of 12,039 kilometers, around 7,500 miles, versus US drivers who drove an average of 14,263 miles, about 23,000 kilometers. Again, about double. But even with that caveat, the US is still exceptionally deadly. If we take a look at the data regarding road traffic fatality rates per distance traveled, specifically deaths per billion vehicle kilometers traveled between the US and major European countries such as Germany, France, and the United Kingdom, the US is still a significant outlier. If you take a look at this data with me, you'll see that deaths per 1 billion vehicle kilometers traveled in the US is over double that in Germany and the UK, and 60% higher than those in France. But things didn't always used to be this way. In fact, in the decades after President Eisenhower ushered in the Federal Aid Highway Act in order to model an integrated network of roadways similar to the German Autobahn, the US interstate highway system was the safest in the world. In 1970, the US had 52,000 fatalities compared to over 100,000 in 16 other peer countries. But by 2012, the number of fatalities in the US had fallen to 33,500, largely due to improvements in healthcare, emergency response, and vehicle technology. But in comparison, the total in those same 16 countries fell to just 24,500. But in recent years, while the number of road fatalities has remained stable, even slightly falling in the EU, fatalities have begun to increase once more in the United States. So what happened? How did the US go from leading the world in traffic safety to bringing up the rear? For starters, one considerable factor is the condition of the roads themselves. America is great, but its roads are very hit or miss. According to US Department of Transportation's Conditions and Performance Report for 2024, the share of federal aid highway pavements with good ride quality only sits at 47.2%. Not even half. And what's even more alarming is that the share of roads categorized with poor ride quality is 22.6%. Now, to be fair, the US Department of Transportation likes to note that the busiest roads by amount of vehicle miles traveled are usually in slightly better condition as they likely have more repair dollars spent on them. But the roads in the United States are stretched thin, and I mean that literally and figuratively. Where I live here in Germany, the Autobahn is actually more than twice as thick as a normal US highway. 27 inches or approximately 70 centimeters of asphalt and concrete are used to construct the roadway, in comparison to just 11 inches in the United States. This helps to prevent cracking and provides a smooth surface for heavy traffic, as well as a much longer usable life. Furthermore, on the off chance that a crack does appear on the road in Germany, the entire section is removed and replaced, resulting in a driving surface largely free from any potholes or bumpy, uneven driving terrain, which is something that's critical for safety at high speeds, which, yes, as you can see from my most recent trip to the United States, is very much not how things are done there. Even major highways and interstates look more like a mosaic than a unified driving surface. The sad reality is that most US highways are well beyond their usable life, and local and state departments of transportation rely heavily on patching up sections to get by, costing every American household an estimated $3,300 a year in hidden costs, from lost time and increased fuel consumption while sitting in traffic jam to extra repairs due to wear and tear. Plus, there's the cost to human life as well. Although correlation does not equal causation, and the relationship between road funding, road conditions, and traffic fatalities are complex, several studies have found that lower levels of investment in road infrastructure are associated with increases in traffic fatalities. For example, a long-running academic analysis using US state data showed that deficient roadway conditions like poor pavement, lack of clear shoulders, and missing safety features were linked to more than half of US highway fatalities, more than factors like alcohol or speeding in some estimates. But outside of things like potholes or cracks in the asphalt, which are actually tracked and studied heavily by various groups that I've mentioned thus far in this video, when talking about road conditions, I feel like it would be a real disservice if I didn't also just address how gross the roads were in the United States. When I was back in the US recently, we drove all the way from Chicago to St. Louis to Kansas City and back, racking up around 1,300 miles in just 10 days. And the roads were pretty disgusting. There was trash everywhere in the median and on the sides of the road. Certainly a lot of littering and plastic trash from fast food establishments, but also like couch cushions and household furniture that I assume just flew off of someone's pickup that weren't secured properly. There are, of course, the occasional spare tire or scrap of retreaded tire from semi-trucks, rocks and sand flying from poorly covered dump trucks, and it all accumulates into a general driving experience that is really astonishingly dangerous. Based on updated research from the AAA Foundation for Traffic Safety, road debris was the dominant factor in approximately 72 deaths and over 53,000 police-reported crashes in 2025 in the United States. But being back behind the wheel in the United States also reminded me that the dangers on the road can follow you off of them as well. Now, usually I try to keep my cool, but did you know that road rage can actually escalate beyond the typical honking and wayward profanities to online stalking and harassment? Seriously, if you really tick someone off on the road, they can actually use people's search sites to look up your license plate number and come find you. Unless, of course, you use the invaluable tools from the sponsor of today's video, Incogni. Incogni tracks down and removes all of your personal data from multiple sites, including online directories, people search sites, and even commercial databases. And I don't have to do anything. They do all of the legwork. Just sign up and give them permission to act on your behalf. And then they go out and find the list that you're on and demand that you be taken off. Plus, if you sign up for their unlimited plan, you have access to their custom removal feature to take down almost everything that is exposed about you online, like your license plate information, for example. Incogni is a proven solution for keeping your identity safe from shady characters, and they are the first and only data removal service to be independently verified by Deloitte. They do what they say they do and actually remove my unwanted personal data online, which is why I have been a loyal member of Incogni for years now. Plus, I can actually use their dashboard to see them working in real time as they continue to work to guard my privacy, which makes me feel so much safer. If you too want to take back your privacy and personal data, use the code ASHTON at the link below in the description of this video to get a big discount, 60% off the annual plan. Now, obviously, road congestion and heavy traffic can make for some pretty unsafe conditions, and it's a growing issue nationwide. In fact, all of the largest 100 metropolitan areas saw an increase in traffic congestion over the past 10 years. But it isn't the only factor making roads dangerous. In fact, there are some statistics that actually seem to prove the opposite. Often, it's the empty roads that prove to be the most deadly. Consider for a moment that road deaths in the United States actually peaked during the pandemic, when there were less cars on the road. According to the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration, it's estimated that 38,680 people were killed in crashes in 2020, which is a 7.2% rise from 2019, which is notable. In fact, the fatality rate per 100 million vehicle miles traveled climbed despite a 13.2% decrease in miles traveled nationwide. And as we moved into 2021, the increase in traffic fatalities became even more alarming. About 42,915 fatalities, marking a 10.5% jump from the previous year, the highest tally since 2005. This rise was likely due to the fact that people were returning to in-office work, and accordingly, there was an 11.2% increase of vehicle miles traveled compared to 2020. At this point in time, we don't have a complete picture yet for 2025, but estimates published from the first half of the year project 39,345 deaths, which is a modest dip from the year prior, but still far above pre-pandemic levels. So what happened? Well, as it turns out, the perception of risk, or really the lack thereof, is equally, if not more so deadly than risky roads and traffic congestion. Researchers cite that the increase of road deaths is mostly due to riskier behaviors, such as speeding, impaired driving, and decreased seatbelt use, contributing to thousands of preventable tragedies across the country. One example is, of course, the wide, straight Stroad designs that encourage high speeds and less attentive driving. You might not find it easy or stress-free to drive through the narrowing, meandering roads here in many parts of Europe, but by forcing you to slow down and pay attention to the more technical conditions, you create a much safer driving environment. Again, don't get me wrong, driving down I-95 is stressful, but a high volume of traffic doesn't, in and of itself, mean higher road deaths. I'm generalizing quite a bit here, but most major European city centers experience higher traffic density and, in many cases, more intense congestion during peak times compared to US interstates, with some estimates suggesting that peak hour congestion delays in Europe are roughly 3 times of that in the United States in similar-sized cities. Yet they experience a fraction of road fatalities. But economics also plays a hidden part in road deaths too. Traffic fatality rates in the US have, for decades, been highly sensitive to fluctuations in gas prices and cyclical variations in macroeconomic conditions like unemployment rates. When gas prices go down, people drive more and deaths go up. When they lose their jobs, they drive less and they drive more carefully. They may stay below the speed limit to avoid getting tickets, and deaths go down. But perhaps the biggest hidden reason US roads are just so deadly is literal. We have a ton of hidden entrances and exits on major US highways. Although many Americans will likely recognize the signs, many don't realize that we actually have a 2-tiered system of interstate roadways in the United States when it comes to safety. The gold standard are the interstate highways with their iconic red, white, and blue signs. These were purposefully designed as freeways, which by definition use ramps and grade separations for all entry and exit. But the US highway system, indicated by white on black shield signs such as US 6, 36, 50, 63, 69, and 190, is a much older and larger network, as you can see from this map. While some sections have been upgraded to freeway standards with limited access and no at-grade intersections, Most of them actually function more as typical arterial roads, with direct property access and standard intersections, even including traffic lights or stop signs. Take a look at this. You can be flying down Highway 36 at 70 miles an hour or more, let's be honest, because on these roads, you often travel just as fast as the interstate, and boom, red light, in the middle of a 4-lane divided highway like in Cameron, Missouri.
Tonight, a major highway in northeast Missouri that's used by thousands of us every day has been rated one of the deadliest in the country.
Or like Highway 63 in the hilly Ozark area. It is not uncommon to pop over a hill and there's just a truck almost stopped at the bottom who is in the left lane trying to make a turn. Keep in mind also that many of these highways are in rural areas, which means two things. One, legally farm equipment with implements are allowed to drive on these roads too, despite the magnificent difference in speed. And two, as you can see here, there are still a lot of incredibly dangerous intersections, including those with just a few feet between the 4-lane divided highway and a railroad crossing. You will be stopped on the tracks waiting to merge onto a highway with no on-ramp and no flashing lights or safety barriers to alert you to an oncoming locomotive. And you know, a lot of what I've talked about today focuses on the risk to drivers, but dangerous roads have deadly implications far beyond those that are just behind the steering wheel. When I was sifting through the data, the statistic that stuck out to me the most was this one. Compared to a 29% improvement in the rest of the developed world, pedestrian fatalities in the United States have increased 75% since 2010. In other words, in the US, there is about one pedestrian fatality every 72 minutes. And when taken in totality, 18% of all traffic deaths are pedestrians. 1 in 5 who weren't even in the car. And while it is a shocking statistic, it isn't all that surprising, I guess. I'm an avid runner and a former triathlete, and my husband's a cyclist. And we have both been in many situations in the US where we've almost been hit by a car. Sometimes intentionally, sometimes not. You know, aggressive drivers are their own category, and there's little that I can say that will change their ability to empathize or care about something other than their ego and the car that they use to compensate for it. But one thing the data shows is that pedestrian road fatalities is a uniquely American problem. In other wealthy places like Europe, pedestrian fatalities have fallen dramatically, even in Canada, which also has big roads and relies a lot on cars. But the likelihood of dying in a crash is much lower. Why? From an infrastructure perspective, throughout much of Europe, you see lower speed limits in pedestrian-heavy or residential areas, and an expansive public transit network. So fewer people need to drive. We also see vehicles that are tested and rated for pedestrian safety, which is why you can't buy a Tesla Cybertruck here, by the way. They're illegal. But from a legal and policy standpoint, there are high fuel taxes and high fuel economy standards, so driving a big dually is largely unaffordable, and so they're just really not as popular. But there is a huge risk to pedestrians, many of whom are children, because American drivers aren't just expecting them to be there. Sure, many cities are reinvesting in bike lanes. I was excited to see some of them when I was back in the United States, like this new stretch outside of the plaza in Kansas City. But despite the bright paint and obvious markings, drivers still don't think to look if someone is there before crossing over it. And listen, we shouldn't overlook the fact that at the end of the day, a huge component to all of this is the strong link between dangerous roads, fatality, and poverty. Beyond the fact that many, if not most, roads are funded with local tax revenue, so lower income areas have less money to maintain their infrastructure and therefore have more deterioration, living on traffic-calm streets with safe sidewalks and well-marked crossings is a luxury in the United States. Far too often, we see roads designed like this one. It's straight, it's wide, it moves at high rates of speed, and it's full of opportunities for conflicts, lots of driveways and intersections. And lo and behold, That's also where we sadly see a scarce amount of pedestrian safety infrastructure. A crosswalk is often 10 minutes away from the bus stop and 10 minutes away from the apartment building. And so you're stuck with the decision. Do I walk for 20 minutes to get to the bus, or do I just run across the road? Now, if you're killed on that street running across the road to catch the bus, you'll be blamed for your death. But really, the design of that road and the conditions that require you to live in that place and near that road, that poverty, directly led to your death. But rarely do we look at these individual deaths from that systemic lens, or hold cities to account to have responsibility to protect their citizens through better infrastructure design. But last but not least, perhaps the biggest reason that roads are so much safer in Europe is because they worked so much harder than the US on improving the things you can't see, things beyond the roads themselves. Many European nations have taken the long view and have tackled the hard, ingrained cultural, political, and engineering issues that must be addressed to bring about sustained reductions in traffic fatalities. This, of course, starts with more rigorous driver's education, which naturally varies from country to country. But in general, between formal training and supervised driving lessons, many learners here need 30 to 40 hours of general practice beyond the minimum to pass their theory and practical tests. But in the US, you see significant differences from state to state, but typical formal training often is just 6 to 20 hours of total instruction, including classroom and behind the wheel, if required, which, as you can see from this map, varies wildly. Many states still emphasize parent-supervised practice rather than professional lessons, which, yikes. But US teens often start driving significantly earlier than Europeans, where licensing ages focus more on older, more mature applicants. I personally had a learner's permit at 15, but there are some states which allow it even earlier. My husband grew up, for example, in Kansas. He had a permit at 14. He never took a class. He only logged hours with his mom and then just passed a simplified test at the DMV on his 16th birthday. But beyond the classroom, when looking across the EU, we also see much more stringent laws and regulations aimed at keeping both drivers and pedestrians safe. Most US states allow you to ride a motorcycle without a helmet once you're over the age of 18 to 21. My home state of Illinois, plus Iowa, still, in 2026, do not have any helmet laws for motorcyclists. That's unheard of in the EU. Plus, in the United States, the standard limit for drunk driving is 0.08%, or 0.08 grams of alcohol per deciliter of blood, while the majority of European countries have a lower general limit. Many actually have a zero-tolerance policy for young drivers, or probationary drivers. And listen, I get it, this whole section can just snowball out of control, but there are still some states in the US which allow you to ride in a car without a seatbelt. It's just reckless, plain and simple. But all of these things coalesce to create a much more dangerous driving experience and driving environment. And the sad reality is it doesn't have to be this way. But I would love to hear your thoughts down below in the comment section. In particular, I would love to hear what the roads are like in your neck of the woods, and which changes have you seen that have made the best driving experience both safer and more comfortable for your community. Let me know down below. And as always, if you enjoyed what you saw today, be sure to hit that thumbs up button. And for more content from Type Ashton, hit that subscribe button. So I'll see you in the next video. Cheers!